106.5 FM and online. It's the After 5 Guest with Wyn Thomas.
And it's absolutely delighted to be today with Sian Collins is with me, author of her new book, Tiding. Sian, thanks for company this afternoon.
Thank you very much for asking me, Wyn.
The book sort of centres around Daphne, a youngest daughter of Reverend Morgan. What does she say she's like?
She's quite an interesting character. She's a bit of an introvert.
Mm-hmm.
She's the kind of person that you might see sitting at the back of a class, taking everything in, but appearing to be looking out of the window and daydreaming. She's quite competitive. She's very good at English. She's very good at spelling. She's a watcher, I would say. She absorbs everything around her. She spins stories in her head. She sometimes gets things a bit wrong, as we see in the book.
And then Sylvia is the oldest daughter because of her age, a little bit distant from Daphne, would you say?
Yes, well, in the way that older sisters often are. They have a different life. She's several years older than Daphne. She's already in secondary school. She's into boys. She's a bit of a mystery, I think, to her sister. She's also an irritant to her sister, but it probably works both ways. I think, speaking as one who has another sister, I think it's a familiar experience for a lot of us, the sibling changes.
Yep. And the murder of the music teacher, Miss O'Dowd, which throws everything and everyone into turmoil in the village, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. It does. Well, it's a very close-knit community, like so many of these places are. And when something as shocking as that happens, everybody either pulls together or retreats a little bit, perhaps, and the finger of suspicion sometimes alights on certain individuals, again, perhaps not entirely fairly.
Mm-hmm. That's what, actually,
but that's what happens.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. So, Glanmorva is the village.
Yes.
Where did that come from? Is that sort of making up of two different words from somewhere, is it?
Yes, I mean, obviously I draw quite a lot on the experiences myself of growing up in a place not too far from here in West Wales. I don't pretend that it's somewhere different. It's based on Larne. But I've called it Glanmorva because it's not exactly Larne, it is like Larne, and all the places, the names and so on are entirely invented, and a lot of the story too is invented.
But the characters are some you must have known in the past.
Well, they are aspects of characters I might have known. But I don't think I hope anybody will actually turn to me and say, "Oh, is that supposed to be me?" Because really it's not. Neither are the two sisters, myself or my own sister. They're figments of my imagination, if you like. But they're an amalgam of all sorts of people that you meet along the way, really.
Yeah, indeed,
through life.
The first part of the book is the discovery of a skull, which convinces Daphne there's a curse on the village.
Yes, that's right.
Where's the skull come from?
Where does the skull come from? And there perhaps I will come clean a little bit in that it is based on something that happened to myself and a couple of friends. We did in fact find a skull. And some of how I describe it is fairly true to what happened. The main difference being that, of course, the skull was not lost. It was handed in its bag, in its box, to the vicar, who took one look at it and took it away, and it was never seen again. So that was just the germ of something to develop right from the start. And I think when I think back over the book itself or the writing of it, I draw from my childhood because I very much wanted to write about growing up in a place like that, because it has strong associations for me. But I didn't want to write a memoir or anything as specific or tied down to facts and reality as that. So I just picked a murder, which again is based on something that did happen, but not exactly like that, and this little incident of the stealing of the skull, and the story developed from those.
It does give me the feel that a lot of it is from your early days and things like that, it's things you've visited and seen, but not exactly in the book, but it does give me that kind of community feel of a small village.
Yes, I think so. And I think that's, in many ways, it's a great privilege to grow up in a small community.
Where everybody knows everybody.
So where everybody, yes, perhaps they know too much.
They know too much, yeah.
And as I say, draw the wrong conclusions. But on the other hand, I think for a child growing up, particularly, in the 50s and 60s, when that small community was quite isolated, that's where your life was completely centred. It was a very safe and very free environment. We all ran wild.
Probably just a bus out, a bus in, that sort of thing.
Yes,
no social media.
No.
Two television channels and that sort of thing, wasn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. And we kids, we went out in the morning and we came back for a meal maybe. And the rest of the time we were outside.
That's right, yeah, exactly right, yeah.
Kicked out in the morning.
Detective Inspector Ronald Blight is sent from Scotland Yard to investigate. There was a lovely description in the first part he comes into it of the way he's dressed and the way he is. I thought you really got a grip of a kind of old Scotland Yard detective there, didn't you?
Yes. He just came into my mind. I don't plan when I write. I have very strong images that I just let them develop and see where they go. And he certainly came into my mind fully dressed, as it were, with his hat and his overcoat.
Yes, lovely.
And the sense of him coming into an environment that was completely alien to him, being from London and a Londoner, born and bred.
And he's suspiciously regarded from the start, isn't he?
Completely. Well, you would, wouldn't you? Any stranger coming in, and you'd peer out of your window and draw the curtains. Yes.
Lovely stuff indeed. Was it a regular kind of practice, did you find out, that they sent a detective from Scotland Yard to a murder?
It's a very interesting question, that, because actually if you do look at the account of what happened in the actual murder, as I say, I stress this, what I've written is only triggered by that story. They did, in fact, send down a wonderfully named detective inspector from Scotland Yard called, I think he was called Reginald Spooner. Spooner of the Yard. You can't get better than that, can you?
No, you can't, can you?
And I think there was the case of another murder that was in the area a few years later, or maybe much the same sort of time. Again, an unsolved murder for quite a long time, where again somebody came from Scotland Yard, because the perception, I suppose, being that the local police just weren't up to it.
Spooner of the Yard is exactly like some kind of 1960s black and white television program, isn't it? Spooner of the Yard.
So I couldn't use his name, obviously, but I thought Blight kind of, would do.
Very similar indeed, yeah. Of course, a big chunk of the book is the winter of 1963, where residents, again, the curse theory raises its head again with Daphne. This big freeze and his lack of mobility due to the snow is all down to the curse, isn't it?
Well, in her mind, as in lots of children, you do something you're not supposed to do, and you immediately begin to realise that you've moved into the adult world that you don't understand. And it's not a surprise then that they begin to feel that it's their fault what happens in the village, in the township rather, next. And yes, it coincided, of course, with this freeze of 1963 that a lot of people of my sort of age will remember as children.
Were you in Larne in those days?
Yes. And I remember we were, school was closed, we were cut off.
On that big hill that comes from the village up to the top.
We couldn't get out, which is very exciting. And the river at the bottom of our garden froze.
And the bay as well, I suppose, wasn't it?
And the bay froze. That was
the
remarkable.
estuary, is it? Yeah.
The estuary, I can so remember that, and seeing the heron, walking on the ice. So for children, it was a wonderful time. No school,
And were the water pipes frozen as well?
Yes, everything.
I think they opened the hydrants in those days, didn't they? Fire hydrants. Did you
They
get water
have.
from there?
I don't, quite honestly. As a child, you don't
No,
really
you don't,
notice
no.
or care
No,
about those
no,
things.
you
As long
don't,
as
yeah.
you have some food and you're fairly warmly dressed, and
Yeah.
out you go. So I guess that might have happened. I think I vividly
Were there shops in
remember.
Larne then? Sold?
Yes, there were shops.
Down in the square, is it? Yeah.
Well, all through Larne, because in those days there were lots of little shops.
Right.
So
And they had plenty of food then, did they, in there?
Well, again, I imagine they
You
did.
can imagine because also you were too young to sort
I know.
of care.
I know that
yeah.
we had a pig. That was we had one every year. The pig was always slaughtered, and then at the bottom in the cellars of the house I grew up in, it was salted. So there was a kind of meat around, I suppose, and well, we all survived, didn't we? But
As a child, all you care about is what's on the table.
exactly, you have no knowledge of how the adult world works.
Now, I'm not going to give too much away, but there's one main suspect of the murder in Glenmorva of Miss O'Dowd.
Yes.
It doesn't come to much in the end, and then there's also another possibility as well, which is left
Yes.
hanging, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right. Without saying.
So we're not going to mention any characters there, because he obviously, the main character, that character, the first one I mentioned, comes into the book quite early on.
Yes.
But not later, not to the character we talk about in the end of the book.
No, that's right. And the first one, again, because of the nature of small communities, the suspicion alights very quickly on the first character. And that continues. And in fact, the policeman from Scotland Yard comes with an a priori assumption about that character.
Now, the first character has got some connection with the estuary. He does a lot of fishing there.
Yes.
And again, there's a wonderful description of him standing up to his ankles in water,
Yes.
casting and spearing and all this sort of thing. It's absolutely brilliant. Another lovely use of words
you.
in there. Yeah.
Thank you.
And as somebody said, I mean, I've read lots of people talking about the book, is that it's wonderfully written. It's really, and it's beautiful wordings and the way it's
Very
put
kind
together.
of you. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's hugely enjoyable to write. Actually, I mean, I think one of the things I've discovered coming late to writing, although I've been teaching literature all my life virtually, is the surprise of it all. That you're never quite sure what's going to happen next, and you find your line.
So you haven't worked out the end, have you, when you start?
No.
Now, some writers do that, some writers don't
Yes,
do it. Yeah.
they're called plotters and what was the other word? Plotters and divers or something. That you know, there's some people who just dive into a story with an idea, which is probably a bit
So
more
you're
like
working your
me.
way through this as you go through the book.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
And if I get stuck and if I go for a walk or something, it's amazing how a new line or something will click into place. And I don't understand that process at all. But I found it completely fascinating. And then you think, oh, yes, of course, that's what happens next. So although I had that notion of there was this murder, and I knew that about the real one, what happened, I had no idea about the other characters or who would be playing an important role or how things might not turn out the way.
So was Daphne
you would
always going to be,
expect.
was always the character Daphne was always going to be in there somewhere?
Yes, she was definitely there, because I think seeing the world through a child's eyes is a very interesting thing to
Yeah.
contemplate, because the interface between
And the innocence
child
is there,
and
isn't it?
adult world, that's
And-
right,
yeah.
is quite complex. And when you're a child about to leave the safety of primary school, I suppose, and small community, even just to go away, go off to secondary school into the beginnings of an adult world.
Yeah.
There's a lot that is quite anxious and mysterious. And then, of course, when you interact with an adult world, as you do in a small town, particularly then, I mean, it was full of elderly people, old ladies, old widows, to us children, people who'd never married or whose husbands or lovers had died in
the war.
It was a kind of interesting time as well, the sort of 1950s, 1960s. And then, of course, you've got the cusp of the 1960s and that new world beginning.
Yes, I noticed the mention of Please Please Me in there.
Yes,
the Beatles.
There was all that exciting world and miniskirts and boys and, all just on the edge of it all, but a bit scared.
Well, thanks so much for coming to see me today. It's absolutely a delight to be my After Five guest today.
Well, I've enjoyed it very much, and thank you again for inviting me, Wyn. It's been great.
Lovely. So that's Sian Collins, and the book is Tiding. It's on Honor Publishers, and of course it's available in most online and in bookshops as well. Sian, thanks so much indeed.
Thank you.